Namaskar. Today we are going to discuss about a very famous dramatic monologue, a poem by Robert Browning, My Last Duchess. The poem is very famous for its poetic qualities and drama monologue also. It is the most famous poem of Robert Browning. Robert Browning was born in 1812 and died in 1889. The first book of poetry of Robert Browning was name was Pure Line was published in 1843, and the last book was published in 1889 in the year of his death. And the another poem books of Browning are dramatic lyrics. It was published in 1845. Man and Women. It was published in 1864. The Ring and the Book, 1868, 1869. And the famous poems in these books are the most important and the most famous poem is My Last Duchess, Christiana, Porphyria's Lover, The Confessional, The Laboratory, Meeting at Night, Parting at Morning, The Lost Mysteries, The Bishop Orders in Tom at St. Rex, The Last Ride Together. It is also a very famous poem by the fireside. Andrew del Sarto, it is also a very famous poem. Rabbi Ben Ezra, Prospice. These are very famous poems by Robert Browning, and he is very famous for dramatic monologue. Before we start the poem, My Last Duchess, we should see some introduction of the poem. My Last Duchess, the poem was published in Dramatic Lyrics in 1842. In the collection of 1849, it was made one of the dramatic romance and lyrics, and in the rearrangement of the poems in 1863, it was put under dramatic romances. In the first publication, it was entitled in Italy, and it was in the 1849 edition with the present title, My Last Duchess was given. The last edition in 1849, the title of the poem, My Last Duchess, was given. My Last Duchess, the poem is a monologue spoken by an Italian duke of ancient lineage, a widower to the confidential agent of a count whose daughter he proposes to make a second duchess. It is not clearly known if Browning based his poem on the life of any particular duke, but it has been suggested that the source of his story was the career of Alfonso II, last of the great Este family. The Duke first married a young girl called Lucrezia, daughter of the Duke of Florenzo. He brought him a handsome dowry. Her life with him was never happy, and she died 3 years later under his suspicious circumstances. Soon after this, Alfonso began negotiation for the hand of Barbara, niece of the Count of Tyrol, whose capital was at the Innsbruck. The agent of the Count who concluded the negotiation was a native of Innsbruck. It is also suggested that My Last Duchess owns is original to Shakespeare's A Winter's Tale with Leonards at the model for the Duke, and Browning has represented the Duchess as a pathetic, stiff-eyed figure rendered incapable by circumstances of giving expression to her talented feeling. Before we start this poem, uh, we, we are going to see the summary of the poem. To the palace of the Italian Duke, who is the speaker in this short but vivid piece, had come to envoy of account whose daughter he was negotiating to marry. The Duke was a widower and taking his guest round the family portrait gallery. He paused before the portrait of his last duchess and drew aside the curtain. He began to comment on the picture. And it was a wonderful portrait, so beautifully executed that the form of his wife came to life in it. Friar Pandolf. Friar Pandolf, very important name. Who painted it? The portrait was painted by Friar Pandolf. Had spent a lot of time and labor over that masterpiece. The portrait, which is hanging on the wall, made by Friar Pandolf. It was the Duke turn to inform his guest that he had deliberately named a friar as the artist. This was because the look of deep and intense passion on the Duchess' face always intrigued onlookers. The important thing is of the portrait is whenever anybody looks towards the face of the lady on who is in portrait, the lookers, the person who looks towards the lady feels that she is looking at him or her. It was clear that they sensed something behind that look other than love for her husband. They would have asked questions about it if only they had the courage. Mention of a friar's name helped to check fancies about an affair between the Duchess and the painter. It was obvious to anyone that the look on her countenance was caused by something more than the more mere presence of her husband in the studio. Its joy was so clear and bright, but it might have been caused by a casual remark from the painter, either a suggestion that her mantle should not cover her wrist so much or that it was impossible. So reproduce on canvas the paint. Even sent flesh that suffused her face. In her case, such a formal, courteous remark was sufficient to call for the blush of happiness. She had an innocence, happy nature that could be pleased easily. The nature of the lady who is in